I first saw it happen at work. I just finished ringing up a customer, when every hair on my neck stood on end. Something in my peripheral vision caught my ear. I work at a board game store, and standing in an alcove peering at the game shelves was a skinny dude with a scraggly beard. His back was to me, but when he turned sideways right at the edge of my vision, I could see his mouth was gaping wide open like he was screaming. Weird, right? I glanced up, ready to laugh, and asked him what was up, but the dude was just chilling, totally normal, face a slight wrinkle on his forehead, lips pursed as he read the back cover of Wingspan. He looked at me. "Yo, I keep hearing about this, is it any good?" "Slightly overrated in my opinion," I replied, "but many people do seem to enjoy it. I'm trying to find a game my girlfriend might play. She's not really into board games and doesn't like competitive stuff. You have any good co-op games? Might I suggest a roll and write technically competitive, but you can't attack or interact with other players, and mostly do your own thing on your board. They're also very beginner friendly." I turned to grab one of the reserved ones from behind the counter, and as I turned back around, I nearly jumped out of my skin because the man had approached so openly. He was directly in front of the counter and his mouth was widen open in a scream, eyes wide, like he was a zombie about to bite me. But it must have been my imagination because as soon as I looked at him straight on, he just looked back at me, mouth quirked. "You... all right, there, my dude," he asked. "Cartographers is our top-selling role and..." "Right," I stammered, recovering myself. But every time I took my eyes away from his face in my periphery, he seemed to be like one of the undead, a corpse with a gaping mouth. I decided to ignore his behavior in the hope that he'd stop. He placed an order for cartographers and I told him I'd give him a call when his copy came in, as I took down his details much to my annoyance. He didn't stop, but continued to stand in my periphery, silently screaming the next week. When I went in for a haircut, the guy sitting a couple of unchairs over from me was also playing dead. He appeared to be slumped in the barber's chair, head lulled to one side. Blue eyes cast down to the ground before me, with his fingers close to the keyboard button. His deft hands massaged my face, the lines of tension marks sniffing. When I turned to look at him directly, he was no longer playing dead, but instead speaking to the stylist, one hand gesturing from under the cape. Yet when I looked away, a moment later gone were his sister. Gestures, I could hear his voice, but he appeared to be lying motionless in his chair in the corner of my eye and corpse. When my haircut was finished and I looked over again, he was gone from the chair. This just kept happening. Honestly, I thought it must be some sort of online fad with people just randomly pretending to be dead. The internet has spawned stranger pranks. I don't have much of an online presence and don't keep up with popular memes. In my head it made sense. It remained a relatively rare occurrence for me, and mostly happened in large crowds, for example the airport. That was where I finally figured out the cause. I was on my way to visit family. Going through airport security, a little farther behind me in line stood a young couple who were pretending to be corpses. Whenever I stopped looking at them, it was annoying and I kept turning my head quickly, hoping to catch them in the ACT. But they were always behaving normally the moment I looked directly at them. And of course, what should have tipped me off is that no one else in the line was reacting to the behavior. Only I could see it. But at that point I was still acting under the assumption that everyone else was in on some new online prank and I wasn't. I'm 42, and definitely give how do you do fellow kids vibes by today's social media standards. So anyway, I put my belongings on the conveyor belt, and the couple in my periphery were now 100% normal, finally. I thought they'd stop pretending, but the moment I collected my stuff and turned around, I nearly shrieked. Because both of them loomed next to me, standing slouched, faces contorted into death masks. You can't see sharp details in your periphery, but you can hand catch when someone is making a terrible hum. Dead face. But when I looked at them head on, to tell them to cut that stuff out, they were both normal, staring at me like I was the weird one. The woman actually hid behind her partner. That's when I realized two things. One, that I was the source of the weirdness, and two, that more specifically the source was in my stuff. I felt around in my pockets, my fingers closed on cold metal. And that's when it all clicked for me. I found my father's pocket watch. Now a little background on this watch. Dad gave it to me the day before he died. It's cracked and doesn't run. He'd had it from before as long as I can remember. And when I was little, I asked him why he always carried a broken watch. He told me it was a family heirloom and that the cracks didn't matter because it told time in a different way. Those were his words. When he finally passed it down to me, he looked troubled as he told me, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse to be able to see the things. It shows my father told me to sell it, but I never could bring myself.